Hello and welcome. Welcome to WAC, Women Against Corruption. It's our new initiative from BTV Women in Finance. I'm writing BTV Finance since 2012. And I had, once in my life, I really had a very good idea, and that was working with cartoons. And it was a German cartoonist who made the first cartoon for me. It was a woman with a dress for money and a hat with money, and it said, "Money suits every woman." And when I started writing about it, I had a friend from United States, and she said, "Dagmar, that's fantastic what you're doing. I do the English side." And that's how we started. And it became bigger and bigger, and it's a lot of fun. We have now over 60 cartoonists from all over the world where I'm allowed to use the cartoons. And to my big surprise, yesterday I was invited with a political party and give a speech about money laundering and organized crime. So we get known slowly. But now we start with Women Against Corruption. We talk about organized crime, money laundering, and corruption, and what does it mean to women. And it was Delia Flores from Argentina with her women networks and her connections from all over the world who said, Dagmar, why don't you join our WEF Argentina group? And there I gave that speech, which is on the site, WAC. Organized crime, money laundering, and corruption. What does it mean to women? And tonight we have something really, really special. And now I pass on to the master of the ceremony for tonight. Katharina, please welcome and start.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dagmar. Good evening. So glad everybody's here. My name is Katharina Esmayer. I'm a research associate, Dagmar just said, at the University of Constance, and a PhD candidate there, and I'm focusing on anti-money laundering policy in Germany. So I was very excited when Dagmar approached me with the idea to start like a little bit a network about it and to bring women together to talk about it. Very excited about that. And I'm excited to be able to host tonight's presentation with Petra Reski and also future WAC events. We have one lined up already with Yasmin Motajimi. She's a Swiss whistleblower who used to work for the World Health Organization and Nestle, and that will be on June 23rd, 2021. So our goal is to invite international speakers to share their experience with us on the topic of corruption, organized crime, money laundering, illicit finance, everything on that wider topic, and give us the opportunity to ask questions to people with experience on that and to discuss. And tonight I have the honor to introduce Petra Reski to you. She's a German journalist and author renowned for her anti-Mafia publications. She grew up in Germany and studied Romance languages, literature, and social sciences at the University of Trier, in Münster, and in Paris. She also attended the Henry-Nannen-Schule in Hamburg, which is a renowned school for journalists in Germany. And she began working in 1988 as an editor for the foreign desk at the media outlet Stern. And she has also worked for other German-speaking magazines and has written several books. And since 1989, she's been living in Italy, particularly in Venice. And since then, she's written about Italy, the mafia, and especially the mafia in Germany and how it has infiltrated the German society and its political sphere. She's also been threatened by the mafia because of her investigations and publications, but has continued to draw attention to these topics. So I'm very thankful that she's taking the time tonight to talk to us and to share with us her experiences. And I'm very excited to talk to you as well after the presentation. So thank you, Mrs. Reski, for your time. It's very great to have you here tonight.
Thank you. So shall I start? Okay, so Katharina introduced me so very extensively. So I'm based in Venice, and and I would like to talk about just my personal, personal experience, the way it is writing about mafia in Germany. So The media have a great responsibility in its depiction of mafia. Articles, films, music, even literature. The media are largely responsible for disseminating a certain imagery of the mafia. Mario Puzo did a great favor to the bosses when he transformed the mafia into a myth and into a folklore. But I have to confess, I am one of the first victims of this kind of mafia folklore, because when I was a student, 20 years old, when I have seen and loved The Good Father, I was impressed by his deeply immoral family values. So I decided in that summer to drive south from my home in the Ruhr area in Germany to Corleone, the Sicilian mafia stronghold. So I drove in a rusty Renault 4 together with my fiancé. We had never been before in Italy. We ignored Venice. We actually lived Rome, Florence, and went straight in 4 days to Corleone, just because I wanted to know what the fictional hometown of the Good Father really was like. When we arrived in Corleone, we saw nothing more than a dusty, unimposing town that looked like more or less a meteorite thrown by a giant into a rocky landscape. Not a hint of Mario Puzo, no similarity with in Coppola's masterpiece. So we decided to go off to the beach instead. And I came back as a journalist in 1989 during the so-called Palermo Spring, which wasn't just any old spring, but the Palermo Spring. It was a moment of hope. The world was finally stirring. The concrete was crumbling in the east. And even in Sicily, the foundation on which mafia had built its power for more than a century seemed, at least, to be shifting, because there were two anti-mafia prosecutors, Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino. They were seen as a shining light besieged by journalists from all over the world. Only 3 years after, there was no hope anymore. Falcone and Borsellino had been killed. And since then, I never stopped to write about the mafia in Italy, mainly. I wrote about turncoats and state witnesses, about mafia women, and how in the years following the assassinations, the anti-mafia laws were gradually abolished until today in Italy. So one of the most important things I learned was, as a journalist, if there is no blood, if there is no dead body in your article, you can't sell it. This was the reason I was on the point to stop to write about the mafia when on August 15th in 2007, 6 Italians from Calabria were executed in the middle of Duisburg, one of those cities in the Ruhr area, the old industrial heart of Western Germany, close to the town I grew up. So actually the crime scene in Duisburg remembered perfectly the Goodfellas. In the hours before their death, the Italians participated in what is for the mafia a very special event. In the pocket of the 18 years old Francesco Tommaso Venturi, there was a burnt prayer card of the Archangel Gabriel. The 6 Italians had on that evening celebrated the induction of the youngest member into the clan. All the victims were from San Luca, the stronghold of the 'Ndrangheta, the Calabrian mafia organization, and Germany's most powerful 'Ndrangheta clan, Pelle Romeo, was linked to the killings. But the 'Ndrangheta, the fact that the 'Ndrangheta not only is the richest mafia organization in Italy, but also the most mobile, so the largest multinational mafia organization and the first to put down roots in Germany, where in the early 1960s, even before the Sicilian Cosa Nostra and the Campanian Camorra, it found its second home. But still, German journalists hardly knew about her existence. Nobody didn't even pronounce the word. The village of San Luca was already known among the Italian investigators as the mother of crime, as it is distinguished by a density high, even for Calabria, of 39 clans to only 4,000 residents. And the mafia families from San Luca count among the most powerful clans in the 'Ndrangheta, and in Germany possesses enormous manpower until today, adapting every type of crime. When in international narcotics or arms trafficking, shakedowns, abductions, car theft, or money laundering, the clans of San Luca look back on decades of experience. So to avoid attracting attention in Germany, fresh young men who have no record of previous convictions, but are related by blood to the bosses and regularly sent from San Luca, are regularly sent to from San Luca to Germany. On the morning after the night of the Duisburg murders, Germany was in a kind of shock. The mafia always exists only once dead bodies are lying on the street. So Germans knew the mafia from the Godfather movies like me, perhaps from the Sopranos as well, but scarcely anyone had ever heard of the Italian mafia-rooted organization with a strange and unpronounceable name for Germans, at least 'Ndrangheta, which had brought its war to Germany. So for decades, two clans from San Luca, the Pelo Romeo and the Nieta Stranjo, have been carrying on a feud for supremacy in drug arms and arms trafficking and for business in Germany. And until the Duisburg bloodbath, the mafia had always been regarded by Germans as only an Italian problem. And I would say still mainly it's like this today. The argument had always gone like the German constitutional state was well armed against all dangers. Germany was for the mafia at most a place of retreat, as if the mafiosi used Germany as a vacation spot. But as more and more investigations into mafia activities in Germany came to light, the situation became increasingly unsettling for the Germans. Suddenly Germans began to suspect that the mafia had by no means descended on their country like a summer storm, but had already been well established in the heart of Germany for more than 40 years, because this was about, or the information that got around. Nobody suspected that the mafia had been doing business since the 1960s in those places where southern Italian guest workers once found jobs on the assembly lines, in the steel mills, and in the mines. The classic basis until today of the mafia in Germany are the industrial centers in the west, south, and southwest, in North Rhine-Westphalia, Bavaria, Hesse, and Baden-Württemberg, in cities like Duisburg, Bochum, Oberhausen, Stuttgart, and Munich. And since the fall of the wall in eastern Germany as well, particularly in cities like Erfurt and Leipzig. So the families of the Campanian Camorra and the Sicilian Cosa Nostra were also active in Germany. Competition between the individual Italian mafia organizations doesn't exist. There are enough pieces of the German pie for everybody. And it's not only Germany. The clans of the 'Ndrangheta are the biggest fans of European freedom of travel. They are also active in Holland and Netherlands, in Belgium, where they control the ports. In France, they have invested in villas on the Côte d'Azur. And in the Balkans, they control the drug smuggling routes. And in Portugal, Greece, and Bulgaria, they invest in tourism. They do all this in harmony with the clans of Sicilian Cosa Nostra and the Neapolitan Camorra, who have learned from the mobility of the 'Ndrangheta and have long done business throughout Europe as well. Not only does a considerable stretch on the Spanish Costa del Sol belong to the Neapolitan Camorra, it's also active in England and Scotland, where its members invest in real estate and give themselves cover with import-export enterprises. The European economic crisis, and now due to the corona crisis, promotes the business of the mafia tremendously. When there is no money, people don't look as closely at where it comes from. So because the Duisburg Mafia massacre first gave the lie to the myth of Germany as a place of retreat for mafiosi, the Bloody Night in Duisburg was a kind of a mishap, at least from the mafia's perspective. For it was certainly not in the clan's interest to make unequivocally clear that the mafia was not exclusively Italian problem, but a global one. No sooner had the Duisburg corpses been buried than the Italian Secret Service from Calabria and San Luca reported that the two enemy clans, the Pelo Romeo and the Neta Strangio, had declared a truce. So that was also entirely in the interest of German politics, which had no more desire than the bosses to discuss the topic of the mafia in Germany. There was reluctance not only to alarm the citizens, but also to endanger the investments of the 'Ndrangheta. Whole Eastern German cities, city centers were rebuilt with the 'Ndrangheta money after the fall of the wall. So there was no interest to talk about this. Immediately after the mafia killings, a German editor asked me to write about the mafia in Germany. And my book, Honored Society, came out a year after the Duisburg massacre, in a moment when the bosses applied to all their energy to lulling the Germans back into their long sleep, which had lasted for at least 40 years. So don't worry, they wanted to say the mafia exists only in backward Italian villages. So the mafiosi devoted themselves intensely to image management. Even while on the run, Giovanni Strangio, one of the Duisburg killers, gave interviews to German newspapers in which he portrayed himself as an Italian man unjustly persecuted by the criminal justice system, guilty only of having been born in San Luca. And the triumph of the mafia in the world is by no means based solely on violence. It is based above all, and that's on money and kind words. So this concerns us as journalists. As long as people believe in this myth of the mafia is in no danger. That's why journalists in the service of the mafia are so precious. The bosses by no means hide from journalists, but they are eager to use them as megaphones for the messages. So therefore, the question is not whether a journalist succeeds in talking to a boss. Rather, it's whether or not one is willing to be used by him for his propaganda. In Germany too, many naive journalists turned at the time into servants of mafia and propaganda. German defenders of the mafia disseminated press reports of innocent persecuted pizza bakers, and many German journalists took down heart-rending immigrant stories in their notepads. There was talk of kin liability and racism, but not of the huge number of clans and individuals listed in the report of the Bundeskriminalamt, the German Federal Criminal Police Office, on the Drangheta in Germany. So when my book came out, forgetting had already set in. The mafia was once again cult. When computer games and television series and party music, it had been again cloaked itself in a folkloric garb and successfully sold as propaganda, such as the notion that its members didn't murder women and children, and that they were good God-fearing and victims of the Italian state. And then in Germany they wanted nothing else but to bake a good pizza romana. And one of the most successful PR agents of the 'Ndrangheta is a guy called Francesco Spano, a long-time well-known Calabrian producer of mafia music. Based in Hamburg, he started a successful media campaign which indoctrinates people to think that the mafia is a special folkloristic brigade, as an endangered group that somewhere in the gorges of the Aspromonte Mountains sings, dances, and occasionally kills each other. And there was almost no German media who did not write about this. Spano merchandised songs, like the one praising the assassination of the police prefect of Palermo dalla Chiesa. And the text goes like, the general is being killed. He didn't have time for the last prayer. He was sent straight to paradise. The text in German and in Italian. Almost every year, Spano pops up in Germany with a new PR action in favor of the 'Ndrangheta. He was even able to add to his mafia music an illustrated book with text of well-respected anti-mafia authors such as Roberto Saviano, Nicola Gratteri, or now that she's dead, Rita Borsellino, sister of Borsellino, without the author's knowledge of it. As a matter of fact, 1 year after the murders of Duisburg, Spano was even praised in an editorial of the magazine Der Spiegel as the person who enjoys the confidence of many bosses, and was therefore chosen to guide two reporters of the magazine along their trip in Calabria to carry out a mafia reportage. Together with one reporter of Der Spiegel, Spano, the mafia music producer, presented the alleged confessions of the alleged mafia boss Giuliano Belfiore, published in Germany as The Honor of Silence, the true confession of a mafia boss. Confessions under a false name, verifiable deeds were either committed altogether and or changed. In the foreword, Spano declares that he wanted to keep the boss' identity secret so as not to harm his professional reputation. The title of the book itself is a nonsense. A mafia boss who tells the truth about his life and the mafia is about as realistic as a flying cow. So even though apparently in Germany such stories are easy to sell, just like this fairy tale of the chatterbox boss. In Germany, people are also unaware that the boss is never hid from journalists, but rather greedily chase after speakers able to broadly disseminate the mafia messages through the language of the media. So the question here is not whether a journalist succeeds in talking to a boss. It's much more a matter of whether journalists allow themselves to be used as a propaganda tool. And how much my book disrupted that goodwill tour of the mafia in Germany, I found out soon it was necessary to make an example, punish one person to teach hundreds a lesson. So shortly after its publication in 2008, I was threatened at a reading in Erfurt. 5 lawsuits had been brought and 2 complaints lodged against me and my book. When I went to Palermo for the first time as a journalist in 1989 and saw Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, I couldn't have imagined that I would one day stand trial in Germany because of a book on the mafia, and that my readings in Germany would take place under police protection. So soon after, my mafia book was censored at the behest of German judges. When I first held my book in my hands, so with its court-ordered, blacked out, like this, passages, those pages seemed to me to be somehow strangely unreal, as if the book had surfaced from underground, as if it were a book that could be dangerous to read. I always expect my fingers to be stained black when I run over those sections. And the Italian media reported extensively about particularly that an Italian restaurant owner and a San Luca-born Duisburg hotelier had managed to get some of the passages concerning them in my book blacked out and by injunction. And even the harshly tested Italian mafia journalist had not ever seen blacked out pages in a book about the mafia. Redactions of content that I had thoroughly backed up with the files of German and Italian mafia investigators, and how little the German judges know about until today the mafia, I learned firsthand in various German courtrooms. They might be forgiven their inability to pronounce the word 'ndrangheta, but not their underestimation of what lies behind the mafia's litigation. And I would like to remember recently, I wrote an article about this, about case in a pizzeria in Frankfurt called Pizzeria Borsellino e Falcone. And when the sister of Falcone bring this to the court because she didn't want to have this kind of public, because it was decorated with images of the good father and so on. She didn't want to see his brother's name used for this kind of mafia folklore. The judge on trial said, nobody said, so I can just resume, do a summary of what happened. The judge said nobody in Germany besides policemen or maybe prosecutors know who was Giovanni Falcone. So it is not an offense to the name of Falcone if it is used together with the good father until today. So this is really kind of strange. Namely, the attempt to prevent journalists from reporting on the mafia. I don't see the journalist task, consider it as reporting on a mafioso when he is already behind bars. As a journalist, I am much more concerned with drawing attention to the dangers of the mafia poses, conveying suspicious facts supported by numerous reliable sources. This is known somewhat stiltedly in German legalese as Verdachtsberichterstattung, or press coverage based on suspicions. It's ultimately about whether the names of suspected parties are to be kept under wraps by the authorities or permitted to be stated publicly by journalists like me. It's not a merit to show that the mafia consists of violent bad guys. It's not very difficult to show problems of mafia bosses, shown as a kind of outlaw story. But the mafia is not an outlaw story. It's a story of a criminal organization that could only survive due to the active support of whole societies, of policemen, politicians, prosecutors, lawyers, businessmen, and the whole white-collar society. So if you show the mafia only through the bad guys, it's like writing about fascism and showing only Hitler and Goebbels. And all this was possibly only by the moral support of a whole country. So the same is for the mafia. The mafia is no foreign body, not alien element in a society. Wherever she is part of the society. So after the honored society, because my book has been translated into English and many other languages, after this sentence, I wrote another book in which I repeated the journey that I made all these years ago from my hometown in Kamen in the Ruhr area in Germany to Corleone. It was a kind of sort of grand tour of the mafia land, just to show to the mafiosi, okay, if you try to threaten me, this new book is my answer. So, but still, I felt a kind of self-censoring myself while I wrote, and even after, when I was sitting at the table together with the lawyer of the editing house to control what I can write and what it is impossible. One legal way to silence journalists is the right of personality that German courts deem to be more important than the interest of the public. So the mafia's influence on media is much more sophisticated nowadays and not based only on fear. You can write about mafia violence as much as you want, but journalists get in serious troubles only when they expose mafia businesses or relationships to politicians and businessmen. So unlike Italy, being a member of the mafia in itself, it's not a criminal offense in Germany. While authorities in Germany must prove that the millions that suspected mafioso has invested in real estate were acquired by illegal means. In Italy, it's the other way around. If a suspect cannot prove how he acquired the money is seized. So even if it's public domain today that business deals of the mafia in Germany are worth millions, deals that include drugs and weapons and transactions and money laundering carried out by cover-up companies, and the legal instrumentarium is not sharp enough. So unlike Italy, being a member of the mafia in itself is not a criminal offense in Germany, while authorities in Germany must prove that the millions that suspected mafioso invested, so in real estate, were acquired by illegal means. In Italy, it's the other way around. So if you are just under, not only if you are only suspected, the money can be already seized. So this is a danger for the whole society, the mafia dealings. If nothing is done, they go unnoticed, and because in Germany they don't fear any actions. After my book, even other books about the mafia in Germany have been blacked. So it works out for the good fathers. They became a kind of guardian of free speech in Germany. The publishers may not want to pay for the court process. So as a writer, you become a problem for them. So, and when you are sued personally and you can't pay for the court cases forever, they can eventually ruin yourself economically. And I experienced this 4 years ago when I wrote an article about the strange thing that not even one journalist put on trial in Germany until today by so-called successful Italian businessmen ever won the trial against them. So in my article published in a weekly newspaper called Freitag, I mentioned the name of so-called successful Italian businessman who operates a restaurant and ice cream parlor in Erfurt, and at the time, and put the German television on trial. So his name was already brought to the public's attention by the public sentence. 2 newspapers and 1 news agency had already quoted his name in the articles before me. So I did nothing else than court reporting. It was a public verdict I made reference to, but still I lost the case. And not only, the owner and editor-in-chief of Freitag, who is the son of the founder of the Spiegel, refused to assist me, and instead he deleted the article from his internet page without even discussing it with me. So I was told that the legal fee was quite a burden for a publisher as small as ours, and it did not seem to have occurred to anyone who works at Freitag that the court and lawyers' fees are perhaps an even greater burden for someone like me who made 321 euros writing the article. For this reason, I went public with it and started a crowdfunding for my legal fees. And I'm happy to say that I collected 25,000 euros. So the legal proceedings are not yet finished. They went on until this year. The Italian businessman wanted damage money, and he went until the federal court in Germany, but they refused it just in the beginning of this year. So, but then I decided to change my form of writing because I wanted to try to transform this humiliating experience in something positive. And in order to avoid for the lawsuits, I wrote 3 fictional novels about Serena Vitale, an anti-Sicilian anti-Mafia prosecutor. But if you have a look on Mario Puzo, there are risks in literature too, because there are many authors, they turn out to be victims of their own fascination. Even Andrea Camilleri even accused his friend, the famous Sicilian writer Leonardo Sciascia, of making the mafia too sympathetic, too fascinating. For example, when he lets Don Mariano swagger in The Day of the Owl about dividing mankind in human beings, half human beings, ass-kissers, and chatterboxes. So, and even Roberto Saviano also seems to be, at least for me, to be so dazzled by mafia charms as many guys in Naples without realizing that he's doing a favor to the mafia when he describes her as invincible figures. So it is powerful only through its supporters, which the mafia used for the purposes as a service company. Without them, the mafia would not exist since a long time. So for me, at least, the really exciting thing in writing about the mafia is the so-called great zone. It is infinitely productive for me, at least for literature, more interesting and more multi-faced than the mafia itself. Without the great zone, the mafia would never have existed. So without the support of the supposedly good, without the cowardice of many and the closed mouth of all those who can take a personal advantage out of the mafia, without their sympathizers, entrepreneurs, politicians, wives, lawyers, notaries, bishops, mayors, policemen, and journalists, the mafia would have been defeated since a long time. Yeah, this is all those who pretend to be on the right side are extremely rewarding, at least from a literary point of view. Yeah, this is more or less my story I wanted to tell you until today. So I'm going on with this. I'm still writing about mafia. But the problem itself has not been resolved. So because after me, as I mentioned, so many journalists have been censored, more or less, films and articles. So it never changed until today in Germany because the press law didn't change.
Thank you so much, Petra Reski. Thank you so much for your talk. It was very insightful to hear about your experiences. That is, I didn't know the entire extent. I have a lot of questions actually, but I wanted to say that if we have questions in the room, you can type them out in the chat, or you can just raise your hand. Usually there's an option to raise your hand and then we can unmute you and you can ask questions. But I think what really, the point that really struck me when you said that it's not, the mafia is not an alien body in a country that is like the phenomenon far away, that's like kind of dark and exciting, I think, for a lot of people. But it's actually a network of illicit actors. It's a businessman, it's a lawyer that all helps the entire system. That really drove it home. I was wondering if I live in Berlin and we have a lot of people talk about the family clans of from families from other foreign countries, Arabic countries or something, that are like, that's the biggest criminal gangs, I guess, that in Berlin people talk about a lot. And I was kind of thinking, I know you're specialized like in the Italian mafia, but I think what happens in the media is kind of the same again, of like folklore, and we have like TV shows like 4 Blocks where it's like super exciting. Do you think like the same thing happening again, where it's like the media is...
I'm always I was noticing this, but even in the films, even if it's Italian mafia, because there have been some fictions on Italian mafia in Germany, and what I notice is always like it's described like something that has nothing to do with us still. And for the clan mafia, the clan organized crime, from Lebanon and so on, it's very easy. So it's let's say it's politically interesting for a German politician, let's say, to attack this kind of mafia, because they look differently. They not look like the Germans or whatever. Like not an Italian guy. You can even like physically they are different. So it's very there's a kind of it's a little bit of racism in it too. Yeah. So it's quite positive for politicians, at least in kind of talking about votes, so they can present themselves like doing against something, the mafia. While it's much more difficult if you are talking about the money that has been laundered until the fall of after the fall of the wall and invested in Eastern Germany, and all the Treuhand story about all this. So this is quite complicated. It's not like doesn't really fit, at least not in the kind of simple story, simple narration, let's say. Yeah.
And do you think that because you said that in the media, the media is actually like sometimes functioning as like servants to the mafia. Do you think, or what do you think the problem is with German authorities in that sense? Why haven't they caught up to Italian, because Italy has implemented some laws that work really well, and they're very much stricter on the mafia. Do you think German authorities they're also blinded a little bit, thinking that it's not affecting them, or that they're already?
Yeah, of course, they didn't. There was no interest, but not only in Germany, but mainly in Germany, because Germany in Europe, after Italy, it's mainly they invest the money in Germany, and then while it's already laundered, they take it back to Italy, or they continue to because for the economic welfare in Germany. So this is the most important country in Europe, but it's still, until today, I never heard one German politician talking about mafia. Not even they don't even use the word mafia. They don't talk about this. No. So it's if they don't consider it kind of interesting to get the votes. So that's the reason why. No? Because you can't get the votes because until today in Germany, even if it's a little bit, let's say there are a little bit more articles and there's a little bit more information. If you want to have information about money laundering in Germany, you may have it, but not the wide public is not so really informed about the extension of what. So if you want to have the support of your voters for the next elections, it's not no use for you to talk about the mafia in Germany, you know. So even it's even you will it's a problem. Maybe it's much more a problem for you than in any advantage, no.
Yeah. Dagmar, I see you raising your hand. I think you can unmute yourself too.
Yeah. First of all, I want to say thank you. That was really fantastic, Petra. Thank you very much. I have one question because we have audience here today from women networks, even from Argentina. And I'm wondering, with this new initiative WAC, Women Against Corruption, if we could work on a kind of list what women and women network could do to make it better. I mean, to get better informed and what each one of us could do about it. You think that would make sense?
Yeah, I think it would make sense. Well, what I noticed, and until today that this didn't change, is when I was under trial and when I had problems with my reporting, the reaction in Italy was like, oh, if you get problems while you are reporting about mafia, this means that you have done right. But in Germany, it was like, oh, well, she had problems and she was on trial, so it means she might have done something that she shouldn't have done. So this is a kind of perception which is completely different. No? So I would like to have more sensibility and awareness about the laws, the press laws in Germany. Because they assure to anybody who wants to defend the kind of personality right, you can silence every journalist. It's very, very easy, you know, and it's easy even for me as freelance journalist. If you don't have the support of a big newspaper behind you, so it can ruin you economically. So I would like to have more interest on a focus on the German press laws. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really wonder with this group which we try, Katharina and I try to form, if we would work together, women around the world, and get more connected and do better network, what is organized crime and what is money laundering and what we have to do and how we can stick together and work together and make it better for fighting crime. I think we could publish that and try to make a list together in maybe during the year with other participants on these videos here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have one more question. What is the rule from women, or you mentioned the wives of the mafia, or are there female mafia bosses, and what's the role of women in the mafia?
Well, they have been always underestimated. The role has been intentionally underestimated. So for me, it was very interesting to find out that let's say for a time years ago, even in Italy, the judges were kind of victims of their patriarcato, no? Of their convictions that women are weak and they can't do certain things, and all this folklore about the rules of the mafias is like they can't be bosses, they can't kill, and things like this. This has never been true. So it was just up to create an image of the weak women, to protect them from legal consequences. So it was very, very easy for the role for them. The women were very, very important at the time. I remember when the first turncoats came out in the late 90s and around 2000. There were so many turncoats, and it was very, very important. The role of the women were very important, because while the women didn't want to support their husbands in this choice, They didn't go to on the other side. They didn't collaborate with the justice. It was the role of the women it's always been underestimated until today. And it's very interesting because the mafia is women and men. So they have different roles, but they do the same things, yeah.